On a chilly autumn morning, mist curled around the edges of the empty street as Private Daniel Hayes stepped off the bus during his short leave from military training. His boots crunched against the frost-dusted pavement, the air sharp with the scent of wet leaves. In the corner of the cracked, graffiti-marked bus stop shelter, something small and trembling caught his eye, a tiny puppy, no more than a few months old, huddled into himself as if trying to disappear. His fur was matted, his ribs faintly visible, and yet his eyes wide, deep brown and unblinking, locked onto Daniel as if he'd been waiting for him all along. Daniel slowly knelt, careful not to startle the fragile creature, and tore a piece from the sandwich he'd been saving. The puppy hesitated, sniffing the air, before inching forward on shaky legs. His tail gave a single, tentative wag as he took the bread from Daniel's hand, chewing with quiet desperation. Daniel smiled faintly, but the warmth in his chest was quickly shadowed by reality. He was due to deploy soon, bound for months overseas. Taking him home wasn't possible. Still, as he rose to leave, he rested a hand lightly on the pup's head and whispered, "I'll come back for you." It was a promise neither fully understood, yet somehow, both believed. In that brief exchange, on that cold morning, an unspoken bond had taken root, one that distance and time would be powerless to break. Local shopkeepers had seen the little dog before, thin, quiet, and always keeping his distance. They whispered among themselves that the puppy had been dumped weeks earlier, perhaps by a family who no longer wanted the burden, or by someone who thought the streets could take care of him. There was no collar around his neck, no tag to tell his name, and no one ever came searching. He was a dog without an owner, without a home, and yet not entirely without hope. He had learned to survive the only way he could, by scavenging scraps from the alley behind the bakery, lapping rainwater from puddles, and accepting the occasional kindness of strangers who offered a crust of bread or a kind word. But what puzzled everyone was his routine. No matter where he roamed, no matter how harsh the weather, he always returned to the same bus stop. Every morning, he would sit on the worn wooden bench, ears twitching at the sound of approaching buses, eyes scanning each face that stepped down. To most people, it was just a sad habit, a stray's meaningless ritual. But what they didn't know, what no one could guess, was that the puppy wasn't waiting for just anyone. In his small, loyal heart, there was only one face, one voice, one pair of hands he hoped to see again. That someone had met him only once, but for the puppy, once was enough to decide who his person was. After Daniel shipped out, the little town slipped back into its quiet rhythm, but for one small figure, the days blurred into a steady, endless wait. Rain or shine, bitter wind or blistering sun, the puppy could be found at the exact same spot on the weathered bus stop bench. His posture was always the same, ears alert, tail still, eyes fixed on the road as if willing a familiar shadow to appear. Every time a bus rumbled into view, his body would tense with anticipation, nose lifting to catch a scent he remembered. And every time strangers stepped off instead, his tail would lower and he would curl back into himself, waiting for the next one. Passengers began to notice the little sentry. Some tossed scraps of bread or pieces of meat. Others, charmed by his loyalty, tried to scoop him up and take him home. But each attempt ended the same. He would wriggle free and dart away, only to return quietly to his post once they were gone. Over the weeks, he became part of the scenery, a living fixture at the edge of town. People told each other about the bus stop dog with a mixture of tenderness and sadness, for no one knew who he waited for, or why his watch never ended. To most, he was a mystery. But to him, it was simple. He was waiting for his person to come back. And until that happened, the bench would remain his place. Winter came early that year, settling over the town like a heavy, icy blanket. For the little dog at the bus stop, the cold was merciless. His once soft fur had thinned into patchy tufts, leaving bare spots that stung in the wind. Each step revealed the faint limp of an old injury, perhaps from a car, perhaps from a fight for food. Yet, even as snow piled high around the shelter, he never abandoned his post. He curled himself tightly on the wooden bench, shivering through the long nights, his eyes still scanning the road by day. One morning, the old grocer from across the street shuffled over, carrying a faded wool blanket. Without a word, he draped it under the bench, making a small nest for the loyal watcher. From then on, the dog had at least one patch of warmth to return to. Children walking to school began greeting him each morning, some offering biscuits or patting his head. They spoke to him as if he understood every word, and perhaps he did. By the time the frost melted and spring crept in, the dog had earned a name among the townspeople, Sentry. It was a title whispered with respect, for it was clear he wasn't simply loitering. He was guarding something unseen, holding a vigil that no one could quite explain. And though the world changed around him, Sentry's gaze never wavered from the road where he believed his person would one day appear. As months turned into years, the quiet devotion of the little dog became part of the town's identity. Locals spoke of him to visitors, and travelers passing through couldn't resist taking photographs. Social media began to fill with snapshots. Sentry lying curled on the bench in the rain. Sentry watching the road under a crimson sunset. Sentry wagging faintly when a child offered him a treat. Captions told the same story again and again. The loyal pup at Maple Street, always here, always waiting. Some posts gathered hundreds of shares, and soon his image traveled far beyond the town. It reached animal lovers' pages, news snippets, even travel blogs. One day, the story landed in the online support group for deployed soldiers. In a dusty barracks lit by a single bare bulb, Daniel sat scrolling through the group's feed, expecting the usual messages from home. Then his thumb froze mid-swipe. There, on his phone screen, was a photo of a dog sitting at a bus stop. The fur was rougher now, the frame thinner, the eyes more weathered, but to Daniel, there was no mistaking him. It was the same puppy from that autumn morning, 2 years older, 2 years leaner, but unmistakably, Sentry. Daniel's heart pounded as he read the caption, still here, waiting for someone. In that moment, every mile between them felt unbearable. He knew no matter what, it was time to go home. Half a world away, under a relentless sun and the constant rumble of distant gunfire, Daniel Hayes was fighting more than just the battles in front of him. The days blurred together. Long patrols, restless nights, the metallic taste of dust in every breath. But in the quiet moments between chaos, his mind would drift somewhere far from the war zone. He would see the bus stop, the cracked bench, and a small, shivering puppy with brown eyes that had looked at him like he was the only safe thing in the world. It was a foolish thought, he told himself. Street dogs rarely lasted long without someone to care for them. The odds that the pup had survived the winter were slim at best. Yet no matter how hard he tried to push the memory away, it returned, especially in moments when fear and exhaustion closed in. In the middle of night watches, while others stared into the darkness for movement, Daniel found himself staring into memory, wondering if the little dog was still there, waiting. He tried to convince himself that he was imagining it, that hope was pointless. But deep down, beneath the layers of discipline and realism the army had drilled into him, a quiet ember refused to die. A part of him believed, needed to believe, that one day, when the buses rolled in and the dust settled, the puppy would still be waiting, just as he had left him. Months later, Daniel's tour finally came to an end. The journey home was a blur of airports, train stations, and familiar landscapes that seemed strange after so long away. Yet nothing felt as endless as that final bus ride into town. He sat by the window, heart pounding harder with every mile, palms damp against his knees. He told himself not to expect too much. After all, 2 years was a lifetime for a stray. But hope had taken root, and it refused to let go. The bus slowed as it approached Maple Street. Daniel's eyes darted toward the familiar shelter, scanning for the patch of fur he had memorized. The bench was empty. His chest tightened until from beneath it a small shape stirred. The dog stepped into the sunlight, older now, his coat weathered and thin. But the moment their eyes met, recognition lit them both. Sentry's tail began to thump wildly, his entire body trembling with excitement. Then he bounded forward, leaping into Daniel's arms with muddy paws and a chorus of whines that quickly turned into joyous barks. Daniel laughed through a tight throat, burying his face in the dog's neck. Around them, the street seemed to vanish. 2 long years of waiting, of hope and uncertainty, collapsed into that single embrace, a reunion neither war, nor distance, nor time could break. Daniel scooped the trembling dog into his arms, holding him as if letting go might somehow make the moment vanish. "You waited all this time," he whispered, his voice breaking. Sentry pressed his head against Daniel's chest, his tail wagging in soft, steady beats, as if to say, "Of course I did." The soldier's arms were strong, but in that instant, they felt like home, for both of them. He carried Sentry down the familiar streets, past shopkeepers who smiled knowingly and children who pointed, whispering, "That's the bus stop dog." At Daniel's doorstep, the smell of food and the warmth of the house spilled out to greet them. Inside waited a soft bed by the fire, a bowl filled to the brim, and gentle hands ready to give the affection the dog had been starved of for so long. From that night on, Sentry never sat at the bus stop again. He no longer needed to watch buses come and go, no longer searched every passing face. Instead, he found his place curled at Daniel's feet each evening, his ears twitching at every sound, guarding not a bench, but the man who had once promised to return, and kept that promise. For Sentry, the wait was over, but his watch had only just begun.